This morning, we want to continue our sermon series. This is part 2 of a sermon series entitled, God is Able. God is Able. And this morning, our sermon topic comes in form of a question. I want to ask you this morning, how big is your God? How big is your God? Our theme text comes from Ephesians chapter 3, verse 20, which says in part, "Now unto him who is able to do exceedingly abundantly above all that we ask or think." How big is your God? A little girl listened attentively as her father read the family devotions. She seemed awed about her parents' talk of God and of his power and of his provision and of his mercy. "Daddy," asked the little girl, placing her little hands on his knees, "how big is God?" And her father thought for a moment and answered, "Honey, God is always a little bigger than you need. Always a little bigger than you need." This morning, I pose to you, how big do you need God to be? Our church needs God to be big. And in fact, we need a God that is without limits. We need a big God this morning. Now, biblical history shows us that many have had problems with trying to figure out how big God was in terms of being able to address their need in order to be able to perform a task. Let us get a glimpse this morning of their testimony that we might understand that God is as big and bigger than we need him to be. First of all, what we say about ourselves influences the size of our God. What we say about ourselves influences the size of our God. Biblical history tells us that when God called people to a great task, the initial response of them was one of inability. Some who God called had speech problems, and they felt like, therefore, they were unable to answer the call of God. Moses felt that way. In Ephesians 3, we see that God called Moses to go down to Israel, to tell Pharaoh specifically, go down to Egypt and tell Pharaoh to let my people go. That was the charge that Moses had. Go down to Egypt, tell Pharaoh to let my people go. I've heard their call, I've heard their cry. Go tell him to let my people go. And Moses offered a number of excuses, which God answered with his personal presence. In Ephesians chapter 4, verse 10, Moses manifested his personal problems. It says, "Moses said to the Lord, 'Oh, my Lord, I am not eloquent, neither before nor since you have spoken to your servant, but I am slow of speech and slow of tongue.'" Moses allowed his personal limitation, and it was a realistic one, to overshadow the limitless power of God. He did not want to answer the call of God because he saw in himself the inability to communicate in a way that he thought would impress Pharaoh. Biblical history reveals to us that some felt inadequate because of their age. Jeremiah felt that way. When God called him to be a prophet to Judah and declare his word, Jeremiah responded by sharing his limitations. He said, "Oh, Lord God, behold, I cannot speak, for I am a youth." We don't know how old he was exactly. Maybe he was 20 years old, but in his mind, he was too young for such a responsibility. He did not want to answer the call of God. Biblical history reveals to us that some had issues of worthiness. Isaiah felt that way. He was called to be a prophet to Judah, and Isaiah declared at the call of God, he said, "Woe is me, for I am undone, because I'm a man of unclean lips, and I dwell among people of an unclean lips. For my eyes have seen the King, the Lord of hosts." Isaiah had a sense of unworthiness, an individual and personal sense of unworthiness, and he had a corporate sense of unworthiness because he dwelt among the people. He did not want to answer the call. Often people struggle with new challenges in life because they lack self-confidence, feeling that somehow they are lacking the abilities, feeling that somehow they're lacking the training, feeling that somehow they're lacking the confidence and the experience. We should not allow feelings of inadequacy to keep us from obeying God's call, to keep us from doing what God is speaking in our lives to do. God has promised that he will always be with us. And when we find ourselves avoiding something that we know we should do, when we find ourselves avoiding God's call, we need to make sure that it's not a result of a lack of confidence, that self-confidence is not the issue, that it doesn't become an excuse. If God has given us a job, he has promised also to equip us to do it. You will never see where God calls you to do something where he leaves you alone to accomplish it. God this morning may be calling someone to a great task, may be calling you to do something great. He may be calling you to change your career. He may be calling you to trust him in the area of your finances like never before. Maybe he is even calling you to ministry, and you feel a sense of unworthiness and an inability to rise to the call. Now, that initial response is somewhat biblical. To stay there is not. When we think about ourselves, what we say to ourselves about ourselves can make a huge difference in our personal concept of the size of our God. You see, self-talk is important. What you say to yourself is important. How we talk to ourselves can make a difference in our ability to achieve. You know, if I have any problem in life, if I had any problem in life, it would have been the fact that my self-talk was not always what it should have been. I have not always been able to envision myself in the most positive light. Quite honestly, it's only since I have answered the call to ministry, only since I've answered the call to ministry and have gotten older, that I have been able to see God work some things in my life. As I've gotten older, at least in my own mind, I see myself getting better. Therefore, I don't have any problem with growing older because I anticipate that God is going to do some great and greater things in my life as I get older than he did in my young years. My self-talk, what I say about me, has gotten better. I can see how God's working with me, and I can see how God is working in me. And so my self-talk has gotten better. The way I see myself and the things that I say about myself are more positive than they used to be. What is your self-talk like? Have you whittled God down to the size of your debt? Have you whittled God down to the size of the problems in your marriage? Have you whittled God down to the seriousness of your ailments? Have you made God small enough where you can control him and box him up and contain him?